list the obligations of the parties and what any penalties are going to get out of it. So, we talked a little bit about our IP, intellectual property rights. A lot of people here, if you're thinking of starting a business or you've been involved in trying to start a business, you'll know that the internet plays a very prominent role, if not in marketing, in fact in the actual transactions themselves and how you're going to transact business. So websites are going to be very important. Copyright, terms of use, privacy policy, you've seen these a million times. Whenever you go on eBay or Amazon or any of those websites, you get this big thing that says, nobody ever reads it, but you click I agree with it. Because you have to agree to their terms of use. And they need some positive, there has to be volition, there has to be something where you are voluntarily agreeing. You can't just click through it. You have to click a thing that says I agree or a checkbox, or you can't press OK and you get a check. So advertising and marketing is going to be very important. Patent, copyright, and trademark, the three pillars of intellectual property. So I'm going to ask you guys once again, who can tell me what the difference is between these three things? This is really important to us if you're in business. You have not necessarily a legal distinction. Who wants to take a shot at it? Who wants to be brave? Who thinks they know?
I believe a trademark is a sign or
okay. You're right.
Okay, so trademark is a sign or something that you use to. That's all I got. Sign.
That's good enough. Something that identifies the company. So it's a sign, a design, an expression associated with a product or a service, something recognizable.
And a copyright is something that you created entirely yourself, so that can be literally where I can share software and things like that.
Copyright is usually created by it's generally what you said, it can be a written work or it can be art or it can be something similar like that, but basically it's a work defined by law, and that can be a song, it can be a play, it can be, it's pretty broad, but it's generally a written or something that's like that. It's not a formula or an invention, which is what a patent is. A patent is more a formula or an invention or a design. And there are all kinds of rules around this. There's millions spent in litigation every year trying to protect these things because exploiting them is where profit comes from when you exploit these things. So you want to make sure that if you've got something special, you want to protect it. So, business vehicles. What are your options? We have a few different options. We have corporations, we have sole proprietorship, we have partnership, and I'm only going to talk about these four because there are other ones, cooperatives and things like that, they're not so common, and you're probably never going to encounter them before you use them. And if you do, by that point, you're probably not going to. So, corporation, sole proprietorship, partnership, joint venture, we're going to talk about each of them in turn, and the advantages and disadvantages of each vehicle. The reason why choosing a business vehicle is very important, choosing the correct one, is because you want to get started on the right foot. And the way you choose the vehicle is by determining, first of all, what industry you're in. And second of all, what are your goals in your business? And based on those two things, you can project into the future. You should always be looking into the future. Don't look to tomorrow, look to 5 years. Look at what you want to do. Is this something you want to sell? Is this something you want to give to your kids one day? Is this something you just are using for another purpose, as a holding company or some other assets? So all those considerations are really going to be important, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So we're going to talk about that. Okay. So sole proprietorship, the easiest one. The simplest one is you. You're an individual, you go online, you go on Ministry of Government Services website, you register a business name, they have a couple of check boxes, you can get a master business license, you can get this, that, and other thing. It costs you $60, I think, to register for 5 years. You basically have to take care of some accounting things, but you can do business. There are more things to do. One of the things that you have to do, of course, is get yourself an HST number if you're doing legalities or consumer products, but otherwise it's pretty straightforward. So the advantages are it's very cheap to set up. You get to do everything. You get all the control, you get all the profits, you don't have to argue with any partners, you can do everything. The disadvantages, the big one, is the liability. Because you are the business. If somebody buys a hot dog in your kiosk and they get their car and they drive away and it explodes, and they get into a car accident and kill someone, then they're going to come back to you wondering why the hot dog was sold and exploded and why all the victims were not. So you want to make sure that you're protected no matter what, and you can do that through who knows what are the ways you can protect yourself. Somebody in the back. Somebody in the back there. You with a light blue shirt there. Me? Yes. It's called the Sequoia method. What do you think? What are some ways you can protect yourself from liability? And just practically speaking.
I mean, it's corporation, that's all.
Yeah, and we're going to get to, that's true. Protecting yourself, you can create a separate legal entity to carry on business on your behalf. That's one way. Yes, sir.
Terms of use.
Terms of use. That's interesting. Terms of use can't really protect you from liability of that kind. But think in a more broad perspective. How can you protect yourself from any future liability? What is the one thing you can do to protect yourself from loss? Not having. That's not enough. But, insurance, guys. I mean, it's the simplest thing in the world. You can get liability insurance, you can be a sole proprietor, carry on business. If somebody sues you, your insurance kicks in, and your premiums go up, but you did lose your house. So there are ways to protect yourself. There are all kinds of fun ways to do that. Well, let's move along to partnerships then. I've cited, by the way, the statutes, the Ontario statutes that you use. And I don't want you to get too caught up in that, but I felt that since I'm supposed to be a lawyer, I should put some law on this. And I'm trying to keep it away from that. So there are two kinds of partnership acts. There are limited partnership act. There's a limited partnership and partnership act. The difference, who knows, what's the difference between general partnership and limited partnership?
Limited liability partnership?
No, that's something else. Okay, so there's, under the Partnerships Act, general partnership and limited liability partnership. Let's forget about LLPs for a second, and just focus on LPs and regular partnerships. Who has an idea? Who can think, has anyone heard of any LLPs, or limited liability ones? Or any LPs? Yes?
Accounting firm?
Accounting firms, yeah. Go work for an accounting firm one day, a lot of them are limited liability partnerships. The reason that they're limited liability partnerships, that's a special kind of partnership where each individual partner is like its own business with its own liability insurance. So the extent of your liability of malpractice only extends to the individual partner. When limited partnerships, they are only liable to the extent of their investment in the business generally, for limited partners. And for general partnerships, it's just like a sole proprietorship, but a bunch of people. Two or more people carrying on business in common with a view of profit. So you want to make sure that if you are getting into a sole proprietorship vehicle or partnership vehicle, your liability is very protected. Liability because it's your own person that's going to be exposed. But there are, I think, is cost sharing. It's easier to start just like a sole proprietorship. It's not expensive, and partnership agreements are great. And cases, they'll be used in conjunction with corporations. Corporations can be partners. So you use a corporation as a partner, you do a partnership agreement, it's very, very flexible. You can do all kinds of fun things with it. You can minimize tax. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And loss and profit sharing. So there are lots of fun ways to shift around losses and profits. Since you're paying your tax as an individual, you can try to shift some of the loss and maybe minimize tax liability. And then, of course, there are disadvantages, just like everything in life. There's a disadvantage to be had. Partners with personal liable, once again, first find good partners. I've had some more stories that I've had to deal with, where you think you're the best friend with the guy, and then a year later you're suing each other for $1 million, and it's awful. And the tax liability is high. The tax at the individual rates. Tax rates are graduated. To a large extent, the corporations have a flat rate right now up to $500,000 at 15%, 25%, whereas the individual will get up to 50% almost, 48% Ontario. And there's no protections from the legal or commercial. So now this is what everyone's waiting for. Corporations is the one that everyone's interested in. Corporations are like another person. You create a corporation, it's got to file some tax returns. Well, we'll talk about the disadvantages in a second. But generally speaking, it's a separate legal entity. It has its own liability. Although oftentimes the principals of the corporation will have to personally guarantee the debts, so they'll get these numbers. It lives forever until it's dissolved. And how do you dissolve? How does a corporation die? How does it get dissolved? Anybody here? You get a gold star. You can name one way. There are lots of ways. I should do a learning class. Bankruptcy? Bankruptcy doesn't necessarily get dissolved. What else? Although if you're defaulting on taxes, you can be involuntarily dissolved by the government. They will just say, you know what, you file tax returns for 2 years, you're done. Turn out your rights. Otherwise, there's voluntary and involuntary. That's one involuntary way. Voluntary ways are you just go and wind up the business. You can dissolve it yourself. So there are lots of ways to get rid of it, but there's shared capital in the business, and it gets a little complicated. The shared capital is transferable, which is good. So if you want to sell a business, you can. Although many times, keep this in mind, if you want to sell a corporation, a lot of times people will sell the assets of the corporation, not the corporation itself, so that they don't have to deal with the share transfer. I wouldn't buy a corporation's shares because you don't know what liabilities you're inheriting. I'm just going to buy all the customer lists and all the equipment and all the employee contracts and everything and put it in my own corporation. And that way I know what I'm getting. Shareholder agreements are a lot like partnership agreements, except corporations, as you'll see in a second, are very, very heavily regulated, much more so than partnership. Like the Partnership Act is relatively short compared to the Business Corporation Act. And the tax rate, I threw in some fun acronyms there, but what this says is, who knows what those are? Anyone take a tax course? Yeah, accounting?
Qualified small business corporation.
Right.
And Canadian controlled private corporation.
Great. Yes, wonderful. Canadian controlled private corporation is under certain circumstances a qualified small business corporation, which is entitled to the small business deduction or the small business rate of income tax, and it basically pays about 15% up to $500,000. So it's pretty sweet if you want to do business in a corporation. You get some good incentives to do that, to stay in Canada and do business. So disadvantages, of course, very heavily regulated, expensive to set up, maintain ongoing reporting requirements, annual minutes, resolutions. You got to do a tax return every year. There are not, if you are incorporating because you want to be protected from liability, on the one hand, you're going to have to guarantee a lot of loans personally if you're dealing with financial institutions and banks. But in addition to that, there is something called piercing the corporate veil. So piercing the corporate veil means even though you get this liability, there are a few circumstances where a person might be able to attack a director or officer personally for liability that's owed to them by the corporation. Generally not shareholders unless the shareholder is actually, in fact, acting in the capacity of the director or officer, even if they're not listed on the shareholder in the director register. But a couple of examples. I had a client who was running a business, actually, it's kind of a sad situation. They went into business, money his best friend. And after 3 years of litigation, about $250,000 in legal fees, they weren't friends anymore. But what happened was the one partner invested money, got it started, the other one had to know how. He was an engineer and started a business that did something in particular. And then the one who invested sort of backed out, the other one took over the business, got himself a Home Depot credit card on the business's name, charged about $50,000 to it on materials and equipment to build a deck for his house, which, from what I was told, was pretty bad. I represented the other one. And then the other guy came back and said, what's going on here? We're being sued by Home Depot's debt collectors for a $50,000 debt that I had no idea about. The guy would not return his calls and lock the office when we didn't know that. So we had to go through a very complex litigation situation where ultimately we had to pierce the corporate veil by saying this guy was not using the assets of the corporation for company business, he was using it for personal business. And in that situation, we can go after the person individually. You don't have to. He's not protected because it wasn't the corporation. It was him personally taking advantage of the corporation. Another way that the veil is pierced is when you're dealing with government trust money like HST or source deductions from payroll paychecks, source deductions, CPP, EI, and income tax. I'm sure how many of you have seen when you get a paycheck and it's supposed to be $300 and it's really $120 because they took out CPP, EI, and income tax and they're remitting it on your behalf. What the corporation or what the business is actually doing is they're taking that money and holding it in a special account to ultimately remit to the federal government on their behalf. And if they spend that money, then the government's going to go after the directors personally for that money. And that's something else I've seen happen in this pretty. A guy who was, he was very interesting. If somebody comes up to you and says, I've got this great business idea, I'm going to put in money to do this, you're really good at marketing. So how about I make you a director, and when the company starts making money, we'll pay you. So you'll have this title of the director, and we'll use your know-how, your marketing know-how. The guy says, yeah, sounds great. He works there for about 8 months. He has a day job where he's working as a VP of marketing for a big company. He says, you know what, I'm good at marketing. I'll throw it in my thing, I'll get my director title. I'll be really special, and then if this thing ever makes money, I'll get some money. If not, I'll be good. So he does it for about 6 or 8 months, moves in touch with the guys. The company is doing okay, but not enough to make a profit, so he's not seeing any money. Talks to them periodically, doesn't know what's going on, sends them an email now and then. How are things going? What's going on? He's not receiving any financial reports, he's not receiving. 3 years go by, and he gets a letter from the Canada Revenue Agency saying, as a director, you were liable around for $350,000 worth of unlimited source deductions that this company has been assessed for. And he comes to me in tears. And what does this mean? And I said, well, you're a director in the government registry, which shows you as a director. They have been collecting and not remitting source deductions, which is government trust money. And as a director, you are responsible for that person. And he's not been involved in business. So luckily we did what's called a due diligence assessment, which is if you were a director but you were an outside director, you weren't involved in the company and you made inquiries that they weren't being answered, basically he was the technical case for due diligence defense. And we made that argument. that you have to be really careful about getting involved in business. I won't be, people ask me to be on boards of directors or I won't do it. Like I'll be an advisor if you want me to be an advisor, but I'm not going to sit on the board because that exposes you to liability. So you have to be really careful with those things. Those are some real true examples. And of course the other thing about the last point I'll make on this slide is just that if you were that guy who was the partner with the Home Depot credit card situation, at that point he said, look, you're exploiting the business, I want it. But they were each 50-50 shareholders, so they couldn't get out. They couldn't get out if they wanted to. Just getting out because one of them had to buy out the other one or something had happened. So if they had spent an extra $2,000 instead of an extra $250,000 on vacation and had a shareholder agreement, then among other things, the shareholder agreement would have had some clauses in there on how you can have a buy-sell agreement where you could get out of the company if you wanted to. It would all have been dissolved. They wanted to save $80,000, so they didn't get $100,000 if you have money. Okay, so here are some legal considerations on the second one. Federal prevention. So people always ask me the question, should I incorporate federally, should I incorporate prevention? What's the difference? Who can tell me? So I can take it here. Well, why would you want to incorporate that? Yeah.
So basically, they said federal government power federal or something.
Right, yeah.
If you are provincial, you follow provincial and federal companies.
Well, you can either incorporate federally or provincially. You can only incorporate in one jurisdiction. I mean, you can incorporate as many as you want. But if you're going to incorporate a company, if you're doing business and you want to incorporate it first, why would you choose to incorporate it on a provincial level as opposed to the federal level? There are a couple of reasons.
If you are a federal incorporation, you can operate your business anywhere in Canada. But if you are a provincial incorporation, you can operate your business in Ontario or other provinces.
Well, that's not necessarily true, but you have a lot more flexibility to operate across the country if you incorporate federally. What were you saying?
You said eventually continue on 3-5.
Well, what you can do is what's called articles of continuance. What you do is you can continue your corporation either federally or in different jurisdictions. So yes, you can change that. But the federal incorporation, why you would do it, a couple of reasons you would do it. First of all, you would do it if you have to do it. So if you're in the aviation industry or shipping or certain types of transportation that are federally regulated, you will have to incorporate it. You want to choice. Another reason you might want to do it is to protect your business name across the country. If you do a name search and you incorporate it at the provincial level, it's only protected really in Ontario. Somebody else can, if I want to, Aaron's Widgets Incorporated, I do it in Ontario. Some other area in BC can do it in BC. Unless I have a really strong brand and I can make an IP argument, I can register a trademark. And by the way, IP law is all federal. So if you register a patent in Canada, it's in Canada. It's not just Ontario. So those are a couple of reasons why you incorporate federally. Provincially, it's a lot cheaper. A lot less onerous name search requirements. You don't have to worry about people stealing your name across the country. You have to worry about having a registered office in every jurisdiction in Canada. But there are different reasons you would do one or the other. Generally, people do an Ontario one, and if they end up doing business in Quebec, they'll do what's called an expert provincial registration in Quebec, so they can do business there. It's a lot cheaper. You don't have to incorporate it. And there are also ways you can extend your corporation to the U.S. There are countries with extraterritorial registrations, so you don't have to incorporate everywhere, but there are reasons why they may not do that. We also have liability, very important. We talked a little bit about that. Commercial liability and other liability. So I'll just give you a quick comparison. One type of liability is somebody who walks into your store and slips on an anthill and breaks his neck. Okay, you're going to get sued for that. So So you want to be protected from that. Commercial liability is if you make a contract with a supplier and one of you defaults on the contract or doesn't fulfill their obligations under the contract. That's a commercial liability. So we want to think about when you're setting up a business, first of all, am I going to be doing business in the province or federal? What business vehicle should I use? Am I going to be working, am I going to have exposure to commercial liability and other types of liability? Maybe I should incorporate. Maybe it's a good idea. If my liability is not very high, maybe I get liability insurance. That's not good. I had a roofer, he's a client, paying $30,000 a year for liability insurance. And that's pretty high, I would say, because he can incorporate it a lot cheaper. But, you know, there were very high liability insurance. He's all over it.
That covers professional insurance. Sort of like
accounting and things like that. Those are mandatory. So if you are a doctor with a CPA or with law pro and law society, or if you're with one of the other regulated industries that requires professional negligence liability insurance, that will be mandated in your licensing requirements. So in order for me to maintain my license as a lawyer, I have to maintain my insurance. But professionals in Ontario now, certain professionals can incorporate as well. But we still have to maintain them. They're called professional corporations. And that's a whole different thing. The doctors are doing it now. Lawyers and accountants. It's most beneficial for doctors to do that. So I can talk to you about that. After we talk about why doctors do that. That's not better deal with that. Ongoing costs and administrative. So you might want to think about, I have a client now who has a business that she's running as a sole proprietor, and she wants to incorporate, but she doesn't want to spend the money that it costs to incorporate. And I don't want to convince her. I just basically objectively told her what the benefits are and what the costs are. And it's really up to her whether she wants to incorporate or not. But there are costs associated with it. But there are benefits. So you have to weigh it. It's a cost-benefit analysis. And of course, when you're setting up a business, your starting point should always be local, provincial, and federal regulations. What burdens are going to be placed on you? You might hear this lecture and absorb all the information, and then decide to go home, go online, rent some office space, and open your own law firm and start businesses. Unfortunately, you have the license to do that, and you get a lot of trouble for trying to do that. Criminal as well as civil. Actually, unauthorized practices and criminal offense. Unless you're doing that. And tax. Everybody loves tax. Why does everybody love tax? Because if you're paying tax, it is really good. If you're paying no tax, you're not making any money. You've got to pay some tax. You don't have to pay a lot of tax. The people that are upset are the people that are paying too much tax. And you're only paying too much tax if you're not structured properly. And one of the things that I do for people is tax structuring and tax law. It's really fun and creative. It's not, I don't do what accountants do. I'm sure many of you may grow into an accounting role at some point, which is more administering that structure that I created and set up. With accountants, I don't do a lot of things. But the fun part is finding the loopholes in the law. So how can I create a structure? How many people know about the double Dutch sandwich? Anybody here read the news about Starbucks? England, what's happening there? Okay, nobody's heard about this? $1 billion in England that gave something like $3 million. This is all over the news.
So say that again.
They made over $1 billion in England, and they made something like $3 million because of this structure that they've set up where they have. I mean, this is complex tax, but like the most complex. They're debating this in Parliament right now in England, and it's been all over the news. Check this stuff out. It's really interesting, and it's a it's mind-boggling. And what they did, I'll try to make it as simple as possible, but basically, they started in the US, and then they licensed all their intellectual property to a company in Ireland that has a much lower tax rate. And then the company in Ireland has subsidiaries in Europe, and that ultimately end up in the Cayman Islands or Barbados or one of those tax havens. And the reason it's a double Dutch sandwich, they call it, is because there's, it goes through Holland and then Switzerland, and they have this whole, layered, stacked levels of subsidiary companies that ends in the islands where they pay zero tax or 2% tax. So through all this structure, and they did it legally, it's all legal. They figured it out how to do this. And they're saving bundles. And not only does that save you a lot of money, but it gives you a more competitive edge against your competitors. Because while your competitors' profit margins are down to 40% because they're paying tax, now yours just increased by 35%. So you are doing way better than they are. You have much more capital to reinvest in them. So I would suggest, if you want to find out a little bit about what's going on in tax news, this is stuff that's been going on and on, and it's starting to get a lot of attention. And it has a lot to do with something else called transfer pricing. I won't get into too much, but it's very high level, complex area of tax law that allows companies just to exponentially increase the profit margins by doing that. So, legal considerations when setting up a business. Finally, any questions so far? We will take some questions at the end. I'll stick around for a minute. Okay. So here's the nuts and bolts. Okay. What do you need protection from? When people come to me when they start a business, they come to me and they say, "I got the best business plan. I'm going to borrow money. I'm going to start this business. I'm going to take on this partner, and what should I, can you incorporate?" And incorporate you, but why are you incorporating? Oh, because I'm supposed to incorporate it, and that's what people do to start business, incorporate it. I said, well, not necessarily. Why are you incorporating? You incorporate because either you're making money or you're exposed. Because you get a lower tax rate, and you get protection. One or the other. You're making a lot of money, not making any money. Oh, well, what are you doing? I'm designing websites for my living room. I have a computer in the living room, and I'm making about $35,000, $40,000 a year. Why are you incorporating? Why? Oh, because I'm designing a website for McDonald's. And even though they're not paying me a lot, if something was wrong with it, they're going to suffer damages. They're not going to be liable. Oh, in that case, incorporate it to protect yourself. So, you want to make sure that you know your exposure. When you're doing your business plans, there should always be something in there. And I know that's kind of the point of this whole thing. When you're doing your business plan, there should always be something in there about your exposure and thinking about what kind of protection you will need and factoring that as a cost of doing business. Because you will, 3 months into your business, find all kinds of things you didn't know you had to spend money on because you thought of riding off in the sunset, everything's going to be fairy tale. You can think of the people that are threatening to sue you because they don't want your product or it costs damage. Even if they don't have an argument, you're going to end up hiring you whether it's going to cost you money. Just because you have to protect yourself. You don't defend yourself. So contracts, lawsuits, and debt. You want to protect yourself against debt. And what types of risks are you exposing yourself to? Professional liability, we talked a little bit about. Injuries, like a banana peel, commercial disputes, breaking contract. So those are the basic ones. But really, when you're doing your business plans, you should give thought and consideration to your liabilities and your exposure, all the different things that are going to cost you more money, not to do business, not as an investment, but just to maintain just to make sure that you're not falling into a hole like a cartoon I had just before this began. You fall into a hole that you didn't expect for a little while long. So, tax consideration. So we have generally, there are lots of taxes. The Income Tax Act alone is the size of 2 books. It's over 2,000 pages. It's this big. It's huge. You should have brought one. It's sort of show you. I mean, you can find one. You can get them online. There's excise tax, which is HST. It's the tax on consumer goods and services. They merged it now. They have a lot of money in that. A lot of corporations are frankly getting around the tax, so they're getting a lot of money. So I cited the Income Tax Act and the Excise Tax Act, but the basic principles are: if you're going to be selling your goods or services, you're going to have to charge HST. That money is held in trust and remitted to the government either monthly, quarterly, or annually. Income tax you have to pay every year. If you're an individual, you have to pay. Who knows? What is the tax year for individuals? Who knows? When is the tax year end for individuals? Nobody taxing? So the tax year for individuals is January 1st to December 5th. That's the tax. Corporations get to choose when they want to do your year. Okay? So if I incorporate, I can make it my year end in March because the way I do business is I sell ice cream. So my business mainly operates from April to September. So I'm going to want my year to be in October, let's say, because that's when I'm going to be able to, plan for my next year. And in that interim period, I'm going to want to spend the money that I would otherwise have paid in tax. So I want to know what my tax liability is going to be before my cyclical business period restarts. So cyclical, cycle, right? If you're on a business cycle. So corporations can, and there are all kinds of other reasons why you would put your year end in other dates other than December 31st. Some people like December 31st. Also, corporations get more time, businesses get more time to file. Somebody mentioned you have to file in April for an individual, you'll wait a couple months, businesses get more. So, there are advantages for being a business and in particular corporation in terms of that. And in terms of structure, I think I missed this slide. So collection of remittances we talked about is the obligation of a business to collect source of action from employees or government HST. That's all trust money. And then personal liability as we discussed for directors, proprietors, partners, everyone. The government wants its money. It wants to make sure it gets paid. So it's going to find a person if the company just walks away or something. It's going to find a person who will actually get that money. And it's not fun when they do it in the meantime. And I've been involved, obviously, in CRO disputes where I've defended people. That's a story that I'm looking at time. They're ruthless. They're ruthless. They will just come to your place of business, and when you're not there, and walk in and go in the back and talk to an employee, and they'll look at some receipts that said they billed only 100 when they really don't find it. And they want to tax something. They go in and say, hey, you went to do some service at that company last week, right? I'm just wondering, how much did you bill for that? And they do that. They just show up and they connect with the employees on work sites, on job sites. I've seen it. I've had clients call me and say, why is this happening? They'll drive by your business to see if you're doing business under a certain business name. If your truck says another business name, they'll say, oh, these are related businesses. You guys have to pay. You guys can't share the small business deduction. You have to only up to 500,000. After that, you're taxed at the regular rate. So there's all kinds of audits that you're not. I've spoken. They're nice when they talk to me. I don't know. You don't want to be in that position. So just make sure that you know what's going on for your directors and running the business. That your taxes are paid up when that's done very good. So what I was just getting at before I speak on with that last slide was minimizing your tax liability through structuring, like the Starbucks example, and Amazon is also doing it. There are a couple of that are in the news right now that do that. Depending on the business vehicle you use, you can, there's deferral, minimization, or splitting. Those are kind of the pillars of tax, reducing your taxable. So who knows what tax? You can tell me anybody, what splitting or tax deferral, tax minimization. And there's I want to flesh this out a little bit. So who's doing accounting? How many people have taken an accounting course? Nobody. I know at least one of you. Somebody will take one.
Tax control,
well, tax deferral is okay. So tax deferral, you only get. Where would the employee benefits get captured by the government? Does somebody they collect tax? Where does the tax get paid on that? Where does the tax? If the government, if the company contributes to an employee, let's say a daycare program, right, and it deducts those expenses from its income to reduce its taxable income. So that's what tax minimization is, right? Using deductions to reduce your taxable income. And then you only pay tax on the amount of your tax. So let's say you use that as one of your deductions. Who pays tax? I mean, ultimately, that's a taxable benefit to the employee. So the employee has to include that up to a certain amount. I mean, there's some breaks here. You have to include that in your income. So if you're getting paid $30,000 a year, but the company is giving you a benefit of $5,000 a year in daycare, you have to include. Unless there's some exception in the act, you have to include that $5,000 in your income. So they're deducting it, but it gets paid something. It's paid in the hands of the employee. You have to be careful with those. So that's two of them. Tax deferral is you don't pay tax on money you haven't yet realized. Okay, so let's say you invest in. Let's say you were smart, and 3 months ago. You bought BlackBerry stock. The BlackBerry was very low. And then last week, when they came out with the new BlackBerry 10, it went up 10%. So you made a 10% capital gain just now. You realized the 10% capital. But did you realize that money? No. It's sitting in shares, right? So you haven't yet. So you can leave it there. Obviously, it's a risk if it's a public company. You don't know what's going to happen to it. But if it's a private company, that you put money into as your own company, you are deferring until you realize it, that amount of capital. Then a capital gain is something else, but it's taxed at preferential rate. So you can play with these strategies to try and reduce your tax liability, or spread it out over time, or split it amongst family members. If you have a corporation, you can employ your husband. If you're making a lot of money and he's not, give him a job, you can justify it, you can get a salary, and split the income on the company. The company writes off the salary as a deduction, and the person gets the income and they're taxed at a marginal rate if they're only getting $30,000 to $40,000. So now you're pocketing the money would have otherwise been paid with the crown. There are lots of fun ways of doing that. So let's. The last thing I think we're going to talk about is. Now you're done. Now you want to end the business. So, how do you do it? What are some reasons that you would want to do it? This should be. Let's have some reasons. Yeah.
Perhaps the business is sort of surpassed the level of expertise and sort of other people come in.
So it's sale.
Right?
Sale?
Yeah.
Okay. So you want to sell it? Yeah, that's a way to do it. Sell it. What else? How else can you end the business? Yes.
Lack of customers.
What does that do to a business? Yeah, bankrupt, right? So let's say you get. Let's say you have way too much debt. So it's time to just stop. Like we need to end this stuff. It's not working. Anything else? What else would you want to get out of the business? kind of the same thing with debt, right? If you can't make money doing it anymore, and your company's not profitable. So I think that's both of your points. The company's no longer profitable, and you just want to stop it, so you don't incur more debts.
But if partnership, when your partner dies, his will, all the shares of his family, there's so much of crap.
Okay. Your partner dies, he had shares in his will, and the shares go to his family. And so why do you want to get out of it? You think debt? Like his reason for getting out, or the other partner?
The woman's still alive. You can't work with that family.
That's why you need a shareholder.
That's so like a regulation for us. Maybe sort of regulatory landscape has changed.
Right, so if it's not profitable, like that's kind of the point that you need to do. That's a good reason. Okay, so debt. If you're no longer making money and you're getting too much debt. Retirement. I'm done. Money's it's still profitable, but nobody wants to buy it because it's like, the bakery industry where it's all family owned and, the competitors just want you to go out of business because, they don't want to buy your thing, they just want you gone, so there's more market share for them. You just want to retire, you're going out of business, sale, liquidate, goodbye. Sale, you got somebody coming up to you and they're interested, why not? And succession, you want to hand it over to your kids. So those are the four reasons. There are other reasons, but those are the sort of the basic reasons that you want to keep in mind when you're starting. Do I want to do this until I'm ready to retire? Am I building this for 5 years, and then 3 to 5 years, and I'm going to sell it to RBC? Or maybe I want my kids to take this over. In any case, you have to structure it properly from the beginning. Otherwise, you get into a situation where you have to reorganize, and it can be expensive to do that. Yes.
You use an example of sale, how you structure it. You plan to sell it 5 years. That would be different.
Okay, so if you have, I guess it depends on the industry, but let's say, type of business, but let's say basic, like generally speaking, let's say you have a corporation, and you wanted to, the difference between, okay, let's take like juxtaposing, right? So on the one hand, you want to give it to your kids, on the other hand, you want to sell it for your money. So if you give it to if you want to give it to your kids, then what you're going to end up doing is giving a bunch of shares to your kids so that they can move into the will. Or you do what's called a corporate will, because there's an exception in the law, in the tax law, that if you have a separate will for your shares in a CCPC that we discussed before, it will bypass the estate tax and go straight to the beneficiary. So you can, if you have a separate will and qualified business corporation, you can do that. So you'll either give your kids the shares at the beginning, or you'll set it up so that you can give it to, you'll either put it into a trust, or you can put it into. Whereas if you want to sell it, what you're going to want to do is have the growth shares in your name or in an entity that you control, so that you can sell. What the growth shares are shares that, like the common shares, will increase in value as the business increases in value. So you want to make sure that those shares are held by something that is not going to incur a lot of tax when they get sold. Shares personally, and people that you trust personally, that will grow in value, because when you sell it, you're going to want to use capital gains exemption. Okay? Does anyone know what the capital gains exemption is? That's a very important law in the Tax Act that gets you out of paying more tax. Basically, capital gain is the sale of a capital asset. Shares in a corporation are those. Okay? You are allowed to sell in your lifetime up to $750,000 worth and receive capital gains that are exempt from income tax.
Your first $750,000 capital gains is
And it doesn't have to be one shot. You want it this year, you want it next year, you want to start a business and sell it. Up to $750,000. If you have a spouse that doesn't work, you're going to want to make sure some of those shares are in that person's name. Even if they're non-voting shares. As long as you have a shareholder that gives you all the control, you have to be very careful. There's always a question mark and things like that, but So, it can get a little complicated, but basically when you're planning for sale, you want to make sure that the shares are held by an individual that can reap the capital gains exemption, so you don't have to pay tax on that. If it's for succession, you want it in other people's names, then you want to give it to or a trust or another corporation that you control that you can give shares to. There's all kinds of fun. I don't know. Does that clarify? I mean, it really depends on the industry, depends on the type of business, depends on who you want to succeed in, who's going to be succeeding you, and what type of sales you're planning for. But ultimately, you're going to want to see a lawyer first to help you structure it, and it's worth paying an extra $500 or whatever they're going to charge you. So where you're at for an accountant who I just found out on the lab, that's what they're doing in discussion I had with the law society. And so here's some fleshing this out a little bit. So debt and bankruptcy. Are you personally liable to the bank? Not good. So if you think closing the doors that are filing for bankruptcy for the corporations to protect you, they won't necessarily guarantee the loans, especially without standing tax liability. You can't even you can't dissolve a corporation without a certificate from the ministry, the government ministry to show you you're owing a tax. And you need it's called a clearance fee. You need to get one if you want to dissolve. Retirement. If you have debt, you have a piece of bank. Here you go, guys. That's what some of my clients have done in the past. They have some debt in the company, but it has assets that are worth about as much as the debt. You don't want to deal with it. You just, here you go, bank. I'm defaulting on the loan. Your security is the business and its assets. Here you go. Here are the keys. Enjoy it. And they do it because of that. With respect to sale, is it a corporation, or is it a partnership interest, or a sole proprietorship interest? What you might be selling in that case is not necessarily the business, but the intellectual property, the customer business, the know-how, the equipment you might end up selling. So we're looking at a share sale or an asset sale, as I alluded to a little bit earlier. You're probably going to want to go with an asset sale, I'd say generally, because you don't want to inherit any tax liability or other liabilities of a corporation. A corporation is like a person. So you don't know what it's done in the past. A share sale requires intensive due diligence by the lawyers who are involved to make sure that the past liability. If you don't find conclusive proof, you end up getting personal guarantees by the vendor that if anything comes up, you can go back to them and sue. But frankly, once the deal is done, it's very difficult to go back. But you do what you can. So based on that, plan is something. And succession. That's where the structure is going to be really important. You're going to want to use a family trust, or you're going to want to use holding companies. You're going to want to have a tribe share structure just to make sure that everything goes smoothly when the time comes. If you end up, or just one thing before that's the last thing I would say is, if you wait too long to do this planning, you can still plan it, but you'll have to pay accountants and lawyers to do things like what are called rollovers, where you can trade shares for other kinds of shares in the corporation. If you have market value, there's a disposition, you have to pay tax on it, but you can defer that tax liability because it's not realized yet. You haven't realized it. At the time that it's realized, there was. So, thanks very much. This is my website. There's a mobile version of it. That's a good way to get a hold of me if you have any questions. I'm happy to help you if you think of setting up a business. Drop me a line, remind me where you met me. I also do some resume counseling and job counseling for people as well. And I've done it for mentoring through UT, and I've done it for mentoring through the Ontario Law Association, things like that. So if you're not getting any questions, drop me a line. But now's a good time. I finished about 15 minutes early because I was wanted to leave some room for questions. So now is your time to get free legal advice for your planning business. You're not probably going to get this opportunity for a while. So I hope you came with questions. I don't know if you did. Let's open it up. Some Q&A.
do you approach something like that or someone who is actually getting to do it?
Oh, I'd like to ask that. So as that person, with you when you start, but you change your name and the idea a little bit. Rather before you change your name,